Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Sunday Supplement. Coming up on today's show, Mauricio Pochettino accuses Tottenham's players of arrogance after their 2-1 defeat at struggling Southampton. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, he's got it all sewn up to become the next Manchester United manager after their incredible win at Paris SaintGermain in the Champions League. Of course, they play Arsenal later today. And Manchester City, they're looking at a very different type of quadruple after FIFA, UEFA, the Premier League and the FA all open investigations into their financial conduct. Here to discuss all that and much more is Rob Draper. He's the chief football writer at the Mail on Sunday. Rory Smith is chief soccer correspondent at the New York Times, and Jonathan Northcroft is the football correspondent at the Sunday Times. Morning, guys. Thanks very much for joining us, particularly you, John, because you hot-footed it down from Manchester City last night, didn't you, where you watched them beat Watford 3-1 at the Etihad. OK, we'll get into that subject a little bit later on in the programme. Don't forget to tweet the show at Sunday Sup. The best will appear on screen over the next 90 minutes. Let's have a look at the papers then. It is the Rot Spurs. That's the back of Rob's paper, The Mail on Sunday this morning. Pochettino blasting his arrogant stars after their defeat at St Mary's. Brilliant result for them in the week. In the Champions League, of course, getting through to the quarter-finals. Not so good, though, at St Mary's yesterday. Some pretty serious stuff on the front page of the Sunday Times sports section. Southampton, they act over anti-Semitic chants during yesterday's game. This was in the main stand. A Sunday Times journalist complained to Southampton. They acted swiftly, and so did Tottenham officials too. That story on the front page of the Sunday Times sports section. Front page of the Sunday Times main section, though, we'll talk about this in part two, revealed the $880 million, the secret World Cup payments to FIFA. This is all relating to the Qatar World Cup. You won't be surprised about that. The Sun's back page this morning. It's Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. We know he'll eventually be confirmed as Manchester United's next manager. Mulder, they'll be in the money. About £6 million on the way to them by way of compensation. Are they about to sign players, though? This man, he wants out of Barcelona. It's Philippe Coutinho, left Liverpool last season, wants to come back to the Premier League. Is it Manchester United? That's the back page of the Star this morning. Is this man staying at Liverpool? I think he probably will eventually. It's Virgil van Dijk, wanted by Real Madrid and Barcelona this morning, according to Steve Bates. But Liverpool will offer him a new contract to stay at Anfield. And Daniel Taylor's column this morning. Provocative stuff. Klopp must soothe the anxieties and not feed them if he is to lead the Reds to title glory. Of course, Liverpool play Burnley at Anfield at lunchtime today. Let's talk about yesterday's action, because you were at St Mary's yesterday, Rob, weren't you? Let's kick off with Tottenham, because the brilliant result in Dortmund in the week, get through to the Champions League quarter-final, and Pochettino was very enthusiastic and very happy talking about the future. And then Tottenham announced that they're about to move back into their new stadium, and then they lose at Southampton. What happened?
Bizarre game. They looked totally in control for the first half. I'd say for the first 16 minutes. Played really well. Delhi, back from 6 weeks out, was playing outstandingly well. And then they folded. And really interesting that Mauricio Pochettino came and talked to us afterwards, because obviously he's on his touchline ban. Very often, managers use that as, if they get a touchline ban, decide that, well, OK, I'm not come do the press conference as well, because that's part of the manager's duties and I'm not allowed to do that day. But he deliberately did all the post-match interviews, so he clearly had a message to get across. And I saw him at Burnley when they lost a couple of weeks ago, and he was angry for obviously slightly other reasons then, because there was a confrontation with the referee. But this is as emotional as I've seen him for a long time. I think the growing frustration with his players, I would say, although he's always very good, he doesn't throw them under the bus. He always says it's my fault as well. You know, I have to be critical of myself. So he includes himself in that group. But I think he'll be very frustrated with his back four, the way they folded. You could then argue that the midfield allowed Southampton onto them, but they really switched off. And he was saying the wrong kind of arrogance. Good arrogance in the first half. We're in the last 8, the Champions League. We were one of the best teams in Europe. And then the wrong kind of arrogance in the second half, like, well, we've got this done. They're only 1-0 up, and they really stepped off it. A slight tactical switch by Southampton, and it completely threw them.
Are you surprised by the emotional reactions, Roy? Because a few weeks ago, before the Burnley game, Tottenham are in the title race, they're in it, they've got this chance, they've got this huge opportunity, they go and beat Borussia Dortmund so convincingly at home. And then, of course, yesterday, with the words, it's just the provocative language, the emotive language that uses about the arrogance that Rob referred to in his press conference, talks about restructure, we need to decide where we are as a football club, what we want to do, we'll have to sit down in the summer and decide, complacency, arrogance. It's all those words which he's using, and then, of course, it's either one way, it veers from one way or the other with him.
I tend to think when managers use that kind of emotional language, it's to get a specific response from their players. It's a card that they play, I think, that they sense that there's something that they need to do, something they need to switch in terms of the mentality or the mindset or the mood of the camp. And that seems to me to be what Pochettino's probably trying to do, that he's identified. This has been a great season for Tottenham, whatever happens from now on, with one slight caveat, which is that if they don't qualify for the Champions League next season, then that counts as a spectacular collapse. But they, with really limited resources compared to Manchester City and Liverpool and Manchester United and Chelsea and Arsenal, they have maintained a title challenge for far longer than most of those teams apart from Liverpool and City. They have got to the quarter-finals of the Champions League. There's a couple of teams in there that Spurs would look at and think we could probably take them on a good day. That could be a potential semi-final for Tottenham, which is an incredible achievement. We can't forget that the failure to invest in the summer. They are the only team ever not to make a transfer throughout a Premier League season. They've done really well, and I wonder if Pochettino's worried that fatigued. They had so many players in the semi-finals of the World Cup, more than anybody else, I think. That will play a part, the small squad. I wonder if he senses that he needs to find something, some other resource in his players just to get them through to the end of the season with third or fourth place intact. Or see the entire season kind of fall apart just at the last, which would be a real shame.
Rob's match report this morning refers to it as a fork in the road, for potentially a fork in the road for Tottenham and for Pochettino.
Yeah, I mean, I was interested when he talked about Spurs maybe reaching their limits. I think he said that yesterday, under their current guise. And that's what it looks like from the outside. You know, Rory talked about the transfers. I mean, as well as last year's transfer window, you actually go back a couple of years before they had a really good one, which I think was 2016, 2017, when they got Son and Trippier pretty cheap. Since then, they haven't really signed, apart from Davinson Sanchez, they haven't really managed to sign a sort of first-team player, Sissoko maybe, that Poch can rely on. So he's been working with the same squad for 3 or 4 years, and you look at the players, it's like he's trying to squeeze every last drop from them. And I have to say, I feel a bit sorry for them, because you look at Christian Eriksen, I think he's made more than 250 starts in football in the last 4 years, which is incredible. Harry Kane keeps getting injured, coming back as early as he can. You know, the commitment of those footballers doesn't seem to be a question for me. And it's understandable that Poch is frustrated at something, but it rather feels to me like the players are the wrong people to take the frustration out on. The frustration should be the position Tottenham find themselves in, the fact he can't sign anyone, the fact he's trying to compete at the top in Europe and the Premier League really with you know, not even half the resources of anyone else. And of course, when he talks like that, when a manager talks like that, questions get raised as to how happy he is.
Does he not need to take a little... I know it's easy to say that Daniel Levy has kind of kept the budgets tight, partly for the stadium, partly out of kind of instinct, and to say that he's to blame for Spurs' relative parsimony in the transfer market. But Pochettino's quite demanding with the profile of player he wants. That makes it even harder to find potential signings, I think. I don't think they've got no money available. I don't think it's the case that there is no budget. I just wonder if partly Pochettino maybe needs to be a little bit more flexible and say, actually, sometimes practicality has to come first.
Yeah, and Daniel Levy, you know, you'd have to say he's managed to raise them up and build a new stadium on, you know, almost nothing. So I actually don't think it's his fault either. I think it's just the fault of where Spurs are in the firmament and how you change that. And in terms of players, you're right. I mean, it doesn't help him that Foyth, I think, which is his big project, doesn't really look like he's going to be a top-class player. Not for me, anyway. So, yeah, maybe Poch has to play a part as well. But limits, I mean, have they reached a limit? That's what I think we're all asking.
Yeah, it's a shame yesterday's result, given the way that they played against Dortmund, particularly over the 2 legs in the Champions League. But Rob, just want to touch quickly on the touchline, Pochettino's touchline ban. Did it make any difference yesterday? And also, was the severity of the punishment, was that appropriate, given that we've seen other instances this season with Klopp, for example, is celebrating the 96th minute winner in the Merseyside derby. Kevin Friend, wasn't it, the West Ham game when he marched onto the pitch, but he escaped punishment there. Marco Silva will clearly be in trouble yesterday for his sort of copycat criticism of the referee in the Newcastle game.
So firstly, he didn't make a difference. He said not, but it's hard to believe that there's such a difference between first half and second half. So if Poch had been there to give them the usual team talk at half time to say, look, this is, you know, you've got to be on this for the second half. Maybe that was a factor. His point was, well, we played really well in the first half and I wasn't there. I wasn't on the bench. So maybe that was a factor. Secondly, I understand why he's upset. Because he was pretty good after Burnley. He apologised straight away. He knew he'd done wrong, and there's plenty of managers who don't do that, and who continue the confrontations, and we know who they are, but are in the post-match press conference. However, it's just a line in the sand. The difference with Klopp is, I know everyone raises that, but that was celebratory. It's not right, and you know, I think maybe they could have done a bit more. But if you confront a referee, you are basically providing a role model to every Parks manager this morning to march onto the pitch and confront the referee at the end. And that's the reason why the FA are strong in it. And I think Pochettino has to realise that they're doing it to defend referees refereeing in the park this morning who are subject to horrendous abuse at times, and that's why Silva will get charged as well and will get a touchline ban.
Yeah, that precise reason, the Klopp incident earlier in the season. Okay, I know he was celebrating, and I can understand the occasion and the intensity and the demands, but it just, from my mind, it just gave other managers license. Well, if he can do it. Well,
I think that, exactly. I think they should have been hard on Klopp, because it basically, as soon as you loosen it a little bit, everyone thinks, oh, we can all do this. So they should have been harder. But the reason why they've been harder on Pochettino is because he actually confronted refereeing as very confrontational and aggressive, and he acknowledged that. Yeah, sure. OK. We need to move on because the race for the top four is on. Manchester United are right back into that under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. You've written all about him this morning, John. And you referenced the interview from a long time ago when Solskjaer was still a player at Manchester United, and the Solskjaer you knew then compared to the Solskjaer you knew now. You also say the lack of ego, with him constantly referencing Ferguson as an assistants like Mike Phelan, Michael Carrick, has led to a potent boot room vibe at Manchester United. Is it as simple as they've just got their old Manchester, they've reverted to the old Manchester United mentality and traditions and traits? Yeah, I think they have. I mean, it is as simple as that, but actually getting back there hasn't been as simple maybe as being portrayed. And what I was trying to do in that piece is show there's a lot more to Solskjaer than just a bloke who smiles and is upbeat. There's a really strong, steely, incredibly driven guy under all of that who's pretty strategic and calculated. And I think he's done quite a few things that are calculated, shall we say. One of them is deliberately involving Phelan, Carrick, always talking about them, talking about Ferguson very consciously. I think he doesn't want to be the only person centre stage. He wants to show everybody that there's more to Manchester United than individuals. It's a club, that it's a dynasty, that the whole Ferguson thing spreads out through anyone that wears a shirt. I think there's a very sort of conscious effort to do that, and he's done it very, very cleverly, very, very well. And he achieved so much as a player against the odds that I'm not in some ways surprised that he's being able to drive himself and drive his football club beyond what we thought, because that's what he did as a player. And I write in that piece about when I saw him in 2005 and he was trying to come back from a horrific knee injury. You know, he'd blown a hole in his knee landing badly. He'd had a year of pain. He hadn't been able to come back. He went to Gothenburg. He had this very unusual operation, and at that point, you know, Ferguson was talking about him in pretty resigned terms that he'd never come back. It took him 3 years to come back, and part of that was sitting at home up all night with this sort of machine strapped to his knee, rolling it back and forwards. The commitment that it takes to do something like that, the drive that it takes, is part of Solskjaer, and part of Solskjaer that maybe hasn't been seen so far, but it's definitely there, and there's a lot more substance to him, and would be substance to him if he was a permanent manager. Can I just take you back to when he was appointed, John? Because clearly you were a fan, but when he was appointed, what was your first reaction? What was your instant? What was your reflex reaction to Solskjaer's name? In fairness, look, I didn't think he'd be where he is, but I thought it was I didn't see it coming either, but I thought it was an incredibly clever interim appointment, and I thought he'd do pretty well. I thought he'd do well
on an interim basis, and then Pochettino would probably come in, and he's gone way beyond that. But I did think that he would surprise people with his steel and his substance.
Yeah. No, that's good. Why Manchester United? Why the delay in announcing that Solskjaer is the new permanent Manchester United manager?
Probably waiting for a setback to announce it to cheer everybody up, I guess. That would be the way that the PR consultants would tell you to do it. I don't know. To be honest, I think they deserve a bit of credit for not waiting for the first good run of results and saying, right, we'll give him the job. Because the mistake United have made for 5 years, 6 years now, is to just wait, just to kind of act on reflex, to think, well, this is going okay, let's do this. And I think it maybe is encouraging that they're thinking, let's just hold our horses, we've got time. He's obviously done a fantastic job, that goes without saying. I'd be inclined, if I was Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, maybe to tone down a little bit of the nostalgia stuff, because I think it doesn't... I can see why he's doing it, I get it as a strategy.
It can only last so long.
It can only last so long, but also it doesn't necessarily highlight all of the other stuff he's done, because... and it's wonderful that he's brilliant to talk to because he's always in such a good mood, but when all you hear is, oh, it's Manchester United, we've done this because it's Manchester United, it makes it sound like, well, I didn't really do anything, to be honest. It's because this club exists. It isn't necessarily the best way of selling himself long term.
He'd be happy with that.
Yeah.
Possibly, yeah.
As a person, I think.
It may not be the best way of selling yourself, but it is a way of developing a spirit around a club, which we know is important. And Gareth Southgate did something similar with England. I thought many things England did well, and Steve Holland's coaching was central to that. But it was creating a feeling, and the Solskjaer-Southgate comparison for me is the key thing they've done is create a feeling around the club, and that's not to diminish. Solskjaer's done some very clever tactical things and was really interesting again against Paris SaintGermain, so it's not to say, oh, it's just about the feeling, but that is a thing in football as well, and Ferguson always recognised that, and you know, we underestimate that, and I think that's obviously what he's trying to do. And you almost create this sort of cult-like, too strong, but group-like group thing, so that the players go, yeah, we can do this because we are Man United and we do score in the last minute. And it's just getting that into the minds of young men, isn't it, that he's trying to do. So, yeah, it diminishes him, but I think, as Johnny says, he probably doesn't mind that. And for the good of the team, he's happy to do that. It might tire after a while, though. I mean, if in 3 years' time we're still getting the sort of Fergie type sort of lectures, we might be rolling our eyes a little bit, but for now it's fresh. And
well, it might also not survive a bad run of form, which will come eventually. And at the current rate of progress, it might be like 2041, but it will happen at some point. They're going to lose again.
Ollie Holt's column this morning in the Mail on Sunday, he says that sport can make dizzy fools of us all, but I'd like to thank Solskjaer one day for making me feel 16 years old again, and that was because of the mood, the atmosphere, the celebration, the nature of Manchester United's victory against Paris SaintGermain. And I completely understand it resonates, I'm sure it resonates with all of us, watching something as magical as that. You won't beat Palace 4, Liverpool 3 for me back in 1990. But, and sorry to spring on an ambush on you, it just made me think of, is there a specific moment, a specific game, when you have watched something unfold like Paris Saint-Germain or Palace Liverpool in 90, where you thought, this is why I love the game, this is why I love this sport?
The game that always comes back to me is probably when I was 16, was a QPR game where they were 4-0 down to Newcastle at half-time, and they pulled it back to 5-5 in the last minute. Went 5-3 down to a team with Beardsley and Waddle in it with 10 minutes to go, and then pulled it back to 5 on the last minute. And yet that on Wednesday reminded me of that feeling that Ollie gets that exactly right. It's just the last 16 of the Champions League, though. It's slightly bizarre, isn't it? Yeah. It doesn't actually... They'll probably go out at some stage, and then it won't mean anything. And then, but for that moment, it means everything.
It's got to be an Aberdeen game for you.
It would be. It was Aberdeen Bayern Munich in '83, which remains, apart from marriage and all that, the best moment of my life. But you know, that summed it up. You know, you're a kid, you're watching your team playing Bayern Munich. You're the best team in Europe probably at the time, and they're 1-0. Well, they're a goal behind in terms of the tie, and score one quite ridiculous goal 10 minutes from time in short succession, and everything changes, and that's the feeling Ollie's talking about. That's what United did in Paris.
Rory, don't do what John Lew did to me in a similar situation when I said, which team would you pay to watch in the Premier League? And he said Burnley.
No, I was going to say the Italy-Germany World Cup semi in 2006, which was just tension for 119 minutes, and then you get the 2 Italian goals. But the one that really staggered me was the Barcelona comeback against PSG, which is the only game that late on I just shut my laptop. I think when they scored the 5th, I shut my laptop and thought, right, well, let's just see how this plays out, and I'll deal with the writing later.
Yeah.
Because it was so clear that something ridiculous was about to happen.
Yeah, magical moments. We're all getting very nostalgic. It's only the Solskjaer that does that to us, isn't it? Talking about Manchester United's past and their history. OK, we'll get back to the game a little bit later in part 5. Because Arsenal do, of course, play host to Manchester United later today at the Emirates. Next up, though, we're going to talk about the league leaders. 4 investigations, though, going on. We'll talk Manchester City. It's coming next. The thing that I was most upset about the Etihad yesterday was nothing to do with Raheem Sterling's first goal. It's Watford's away kit.
What's wrong with yellow?
What are they doing wearing green?
I know. You want the Hornets, don't you?
Tottenham wore green yesterday as well, I think, didn't they?
You did,
They
yeah.
lost. They lost as well. Watford lost. Talk us through Sterling's first goal, though. His first goal of a hat-trick, and we laud him and we love him, but should this goal have stood?
No, I mean, it was a great performance by Sterling. Came alive in the second half, decided the game in a tight circumstance, but it hinged on a controversial opening goal where there's a through ball, Aguero touches it on. Sterling was about 2 yards offside when the ball was touched onto him. But Daryl Janmaat slid in, hit the ball against Sterling's shins, the ball goes in, the linesman flags offside, and then it started to get complicated. Because Paul Tierney, the referee, went over to consult the linesman, reversed the decision on the basis that Janmaat had played the ball against Sterling, and it left us all going back onto the FA website and looking at Rule 11, because it seems
was
that...
Was Matt Dunn there yesterday? You needed Matt Dunn, didn't you?
Sam Wallace was there with a hotline to Stockley Park, I think. You know, he had a whole week of it. I think the issue was that it's a bit like the Harry Kane one last week, that you are you're deemed active if you are deemed to be challenging for the ball, or you are attempting to play the ball in a way which interferes with the opponent. And the key issue is proximity. So in this case, Sterling was within a yard of the ball, and Janmaat had to slide in to stop Sterling getting to it, which was, you know, his action affecting Janmaat's action, which, according to Sam, the difference with the Harry Kane one was that Harry Kane wasn't as close to the ball, and his action didn't force who was it that pulled him back? Mustafi, to pull him back. But it was one of those, both managers agreed that it probably was offside. Guardiola apologised to Watford afterwards. The interesting point was VAR, because we ended up talking about VAR and how it might have helped, but actually I think in this case it wouldn't have done, because VAR can only establish facts for you, but this is the part which is subjective. It's how you interpret the facts, and Tierney's interpretation of the facts seemed to be fairly unique, shall we say.
I always wonder in these situations, I mean, the Wednesday night Manchester United Paris SaintGermain, Kane last weekend, and yesterday at Manchester City, just 3 examples, whether the players and the managers know themselves at the time whether this goal should stand. Manchester United, particularly on Wednesday, Rory, I think Manchester United players were down by the corner flag, thinking, oh, well, obviously we'll just take a corner in the last few seconds because this won't be... Well, he won't give a penalty.
But Diogo Dalot did appeal pretty strongly for the penalty. To me, that wasn't a handball. I realise I'm in the minority, and UEFA amazingly have come out and confirmed that their own decision was correct, which is a real surprise to everybody. But I think the problem with all 3 is that we're in danger of... And it's a real issue that we kind of have to separate from individual instances. We're in danger of letting kind of the letter of the law dominate the spirit of them. And increasingly it feels as though refereeing is becoming a kind of bureaucratic, technocratic exercise in making sure that the rules are not interfered with by the football. And I think yesterday's example is a great one, because instinctively to fans, I think that probably feels like the wrong decision. Janmaat technically did touch the ball onto Sterling, but as a fan you think, well, but he's obviously offside because Janmaat's only doing that, as you say, Johnny, because Sterling is there making a movement towards the ball. The laws aren't kind of... They weren't given to us from heaven. They're not actual laws. They're just the rules of a game that we can change if we want. And I think if everything feels instinctively wrong to players, to fans, to managers, we probably have to look at the rule rather than saying we've all got to get used to this new interpretation, because the rules they're not sort of sacrosanct. We are allowed to change them. And the problem partly is they keep changing the interpretations, and it makes it really hard to follow.
But hold on, the one thing managers ask for and fans is consistency. And if you want consistency, then you have to apply the rules consistently. And I think that's your problem. I agree that it would be nice if you could, there's a degree of common sense, but common sense doesn't make for great law often, because you get different referees, different interpretation. I think the real problem at the moment is we're playing a different set of rules in the Premier League to UEFA and FIFA, and that's where a lot of angst is. That clearly is a handball on Wednesday by the interpretation that FIFA and UEFA are playing at the moment. So the referee has to give handball. It is handball. In the Premier League, it's probably not given, and that gets us all angry because we go, "Oh, that's not a handball," and So I think that's the prime difficulty. Can we not just get some consistency across the bodies and say this is the interpretation?
See, I think once you introduce the concept of VAR, you're going away from it being about the referee's interpretation of events, and you're trying to move towards fact. So therefore, you've got to rewrite the rules to make sure there's as much fact and as little subjectivity as possible. So with the offside one, for example, why not have it that if the next touch is by a player in the offside position, then he's offside. But if he doesn't make the next touch, then he's not offside. That would have sorted out yesterday's one. The handball one, again, you can pare that down to fact. You can pare it down either way. Yeah, either hits his arm or it doesn't. So it does seem that if we're having VAR, the rules have got to be amended so that the decisions, maybe a bit like cricket, are all just coming down to black and white. But what you can't have is VAR and subjectivity.
No, sure. Well, we'll have VAR next season in the Premier League, of course. City did go on to win that game comfortably, 3-1 at the Etihad in the end with Sterling's hat-trick. Just wonder what the mood's like at the club behind the scenes as well, John, because of course we know that there are 4 separate investigations, UEFA, FIFA, Premier League and the FA, into Manchester City and the financial regulations. First of all, what's the mood like at the club? Has it cast a shadow over the way they're playing and their pursuit of 4 trophies?
I think there's a bit of indignation at the club that they feel, and their fans certainly feel, that this is an attempt to detract from the pursuit of those 4 trophies and the great football that they're playing. And this week at last, and I criticised them for not having done so, at last City came out with another statement further to the one back in November, initially about FFP and the Football Leaks investigation. So, in reaction to the fact they are now formally under investigation, they've come out with something a bit stronger, which is to say these allegations are false, and they clearly feel that they're picked on. I feel that's a little bit deluded, because Football Leaks is a widespread, wide-ranging 1.8 million documents. It's about all of football, and it started off in the Bundesliga. It started off in Portugal, actually, with leaks about Portuguese clubs. Then it was Bundesliga clubs. There's a book, the Football Leaks book, which has got many of the allegations detailed. There's more about Manchester United in that book than there is about Manchester City. I think they're only getting round to Manchester City now. So to portray it as a witch hunt, which is what the feeling at Manchester City is, I think is wrong and misguided. And I'm glad that at last that there's movement on this, that it's going to be investigated, and that City are going to offer us their defence, because we haven't really heard it yet.
There's the series of leaks, and of course people who are crossing. There are so many documents. It's impossible to get through all of them. The ones we've seen, do they make you feel uncomfortable, Rory? Well,
as Johnny says, I think the crucial thing now is that they're investigated properly by the 4 different authorities, investigating them on various different subjects. They're not all into breaches of FFP. No. The City's view, and I think it's something that is hugely relevant, is that the documents that the Football Leaks are based on were hacked. They weren't leaked. That means that they are legally, in certain circumstances, they can be legally dubious. I think it's, as Johnny says, I think it's wrong to pretend this is a targeted attack on Manchester City. The people who have been hacked by Football Leaks, or leaked, whatever the correct legal term for what they've done is, but hacked, I think, is the correct answer.
Although I think Rui Pinto, who's just been arrested, says that they weren't hacked. I think his defence is that he got them in a different way. We can be sceptical about that.
Yeah, but if that's his defence, that's his defence. The Rui Pinto legal case is really important, as there's a degree of that casts a shadow on Portugal as a whole, because if you look at the way that's played out, that's troubling. What you want, ultimately, is to know how many of the allegations are true, and if they are true, to what to what extent they made a material difference to City, and that is hopefully what the various investigations will establish. Until that point, I think we probably have to be quite cautious. I hope that they are not true, is probably the best thing, because it would be nice to be able to appreciate this City for what they are. We know that they did breach FFP at one point, and they have been punished for that already. I think we're all kind of on board with that. You can make a different case about whether FFP should exist in the first place, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. That, I suspect, is a personal choice, really. Depends on your priorities. If they are proved to have misled people, and that's still an if, then they should be punished for it. But until they are, then I guess we have to wait on the investigation.
Is there a case to say that in terms of the media, I mean, your paper this morning, Mail on Sunday, Nick Harris has walked us through it, and the potential punishments and what Manchester City are being investigated for. But is there any sense at all that the media haven't quite grasped it or aren't quite sure how to attack this story?
Possibly. I think the problem with financial fair play
in the sense that we used to mud on, for clarification, we used to mud on boots, dressing room rows, training room rows, transfers, this, that, the other. This is a story that we're not accustomed to writing about.
Few people understand financial fair play, and less people care about it. So I think that's ultimately where you start from, and particularly in fans. I read through the regulations this week, and that's the fourth time now I've done that in the last 6 or 7 years. That's 4 hours of my life I'm never getting back. And it's really arcane, difficult stuff to get through. I've always, for me, the distinction is, like, we can have an argument here about whether the financial fair play rules are fair, whether they were sort of a bit of a stitch up by the traditional clubs, and I totally get that. It seems like there was no limit to that, but that's not really the issue in play. What UEFA and other people investigating is were they manipulated? As Rory and John say, we don't know yet. We don't have the full context of these emails. It's really difficult. It's like a historian trying to piece together what might this mean, because unless you see the whole email chain, there might be an innocent explanation for it. We actually have no idea at the moment, but of course that's what UEFA will do. City will have to cooperate with that, because they'll say, well, they'll be asking questions now. They will already have asked questions of City's lawyers. I think even Pep Guardiola said, well, if we've done something wrong, then fair enough, then let's do it. But they want clarity, they want it done. That's all we can hope for at the moment, is that this is done relatively quickly, and that we know. And if it's not an offence, then let's move on, because the football's wonderful. We all know that, but you can separate the football from what's happened here and go, well, if something's happened, let's investigate, let's see.
You just mentioned that email chat, because the problem I foresee here is, did you say billions of documents or millions?
Millions. I think it's 1.8. No, I think it's 1.8 million documents.
So for the 1.8 million, so for the process to be complete, you'd expect lawyers for all the organisations to go through every single document, because you just mentioned the email trail. It's no good having one email if you haven't got the others.
And I think that's one thing that Rui Pinto, who's the Portuguese leaker or hacker who's been arrested, has said that if he has to turn over his documents, he's worried they'll be destroyed in Portugal. And as Rory kind of alludes, that might be self-interest.
Yeah. Okay.
As I understand it, City are less worried about the FFP part of this than they are about the allegations about the signing of young players, because UEFA found it very difficult to act on FFP, and I think City have always been confident that it doesn't really stand up legally, their UEFA's case. Yeah. But there's a precedent for them punishing transfers, as we've seen with Chelsea, of young players. I think that's what they worry about.
OK, well, they're so confident. They did ask us to point out this morning that the accusation of financial irregularities are entirely false. The club's published accounts are full and complete in a matter of legal and regulatory record. That statement, of course, on the Manchester City website as well. We haven't heard from Qatar this morning. We did hear from Manchester City. The front page of the Sunday Times, John, this is a story in your paper, revealed the £880 million, the secret payment over the television deal for the Qatar World Cup, and the bonus, the huge bonus that would be paid if Qatar somehow got their hands on the 2022 World Cup, which, of course, they have just talked us through this one. We've got a couple of minutes left in the part, but, of course, we should try to cover it as much as we can for completeness. Well, again, these are, I think, based on leaked documents, but the story is that just before the World Cup vote, 21 days before, in 2010, there was magically a TV deal proposed by Al Jazeera at the time, which is a Qatar state broadcaster, to broadcast the World Cup in the Middle East and North Africa, that was worth an extraordinary amount of money at the time, £400 million,
US dollars, 100 million of which was conditional on Qatar winning the World Cup bid, which lo and behold they did. And then there was further money down the line again from, I think, beIN Sports by that time, for the next TV deal, again over market value. And the allegation is that because the TV channels are state controlled, this was Qatar itself offering money to FIFA at a time they were about to vote, and that perhaps breaches anti-bribery practices that FIFA have got, which FIFA now have to answer that. But, you know, it's yet another story, isn't it, about the Qatar World Cup and the vote, which maybe there's a fatigue factor. Are we surprised at this anymore?
Mm. Do you guys feel that there'll be any, in terms of where this story is heading, do you think it will go anywhere? Well,
it depends if they can, I suppose, add to the charges of the people who were involved in that vote in 2010.
Yeah.
Is it only 3 are not currently indicted, charged or jailed, or have since passed on? Yeah. There's really not very many left who are unstained by that. Johnny's right. I think that the scale of alleged corruption in that vote is so astonishing that it's quite easy to become quite jaded by it. So it will no doubt have ramifications, but a lot of the people who will have been involved in it are probably already being punished for other things.
I don't doubt it will have ramifications, because it originally surfaced in Benita Merides was one of the whistleblowers who brought this, and her book was 2 years ago. And I have to point out that Nick Harris and Mail on Sunday wrote about this 100 million bonus 18 months ago. So it's out there, the information's out there. I haven't read all the details of the Sunday Times story, so there may be additional information in the Sunday Times story. But this is a line FIFA could have pursued, you know, over the last couple of years if they'd wanted to, and, you know, as far as I'm aware, they haven't rigorously pursued that. So I think we're all set for a Qatar World Cup, aren't we? We all know that. And, you know, as Rory points out, the people who are involved in that vote, there's not many people left to charge.
No, sure. OK, interesting stuff, good stuff again by the Sunday Times this morning. OK, next up in part 3, it's a subject I'm looking forward to getting into, about equality and equal pay for equal play. More on that coming next. Welcome back with us this morning, Rob Draper, Rory Smith and Jonathan Northcroft. Let's just remind you what's in the papers then this morning. Mail on Sunday, Rob's paper. The Rot Spurs. Rob was there yesterday to see Spurs lose. It's 3 defeats in 4 in the Premier League for them now. Pochettino blasting his players, called them arrogant and complacent. Of course, brilliant result for them, in the week against Borussia Dortmund in the Champions League. Front page of the Sunday Times just been talking about this story, the $880 million, the secret World Cup payments to FIFA. This is over the Qatar World Cup in 2022. The anointed one, John's piece this morning, Manchester United's imminent announcement of their next manager, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. John's written a profile piece on him this morning. Back of the Sun, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, £6 million on the way to Mulder for their manager by way of compensation. Daniel Taylor's column this morning. Jurgen Klopp, we must soothe the anxieties if Liverpool are to go on to win the Premier League title. Liverpool, of course, played Burnley at midday today. OK, let's talk about England and the She Believes Cup, which they won. Ahead of the World Cup later this year, in June, Rory. But I'm fascinated by one of their opponents, the USA, and their national team, that the women have launched a lawsuit in America because they want equal pay for equal play, which is their argument is they should be paid exactly the same as the men for success in the tournament. Adidas yesterday announced on social media that they would pay female athletes at the World Cup the same as their male counterparts. They will be paid exactly the same. I don't know if that extends to the commercial agreements elsewhere with the US national team. But what are your thoughts on the premise and the idea behind equal pay for equal play? I
think it's a really important case. It's a really important issue, obviously. The basic premise of it is that 28 players of the women's national team in the States they've not filed a civil action lawsuit, but they are party to it and they kind of support it, detailing the fact that they think they are entitled to not just equal pay in terms of representing their country, the amount of money they receive, but equal working conditions, so things like travel, training bases. There was an issue in women's football for a long time about playing on artificial pitches. The last World Cup in 2015 was largely, I think, or if not entirely, on artificial pitches, which you would never imagine happening in the Men's World Cup. that's crucial to it as well. That's why they're suing their own federation, their own employers. The women's players in the States are on central contracts, effectively. They are guaranteed a small sort of income for playing for their country, along with a larger income playing for their country with smaller bonuses when they actually play. Whereas the US men's team, and I think this is the case with most men's teams, get a bonus for playing for their country. There's no central contract. They want that to be equalised so that the amount of money that they are earning for playing for their country, for doing the same thing as the men are doing, is level. And that, I think, makes perfect sense, because they are both representing the United States, they are both playing football for the United States, they are doing the same job. They should receive the same money for that. That seems to me fairly fundamental principle of equality, to be honest. But
some people will argue commercial agreements, for example. You could use a Premier League example of the amount of money that pours into the game through television, sponsorship, through whatever source, Rory. People will have that argument that there isn't equality in terms of the amount of money that pours into the men and the women's game.
No, there isn't. That's absolutely true. It's not a subject I will pretend I have all the answers to, but what I would say...
sure.
Instinctively, to me, I would say that if you take, say, two players who play for Manchester United men's and women's team, they bring in not more money to play for the men's team, but the men's team attracts bigger crowds, attracts greater television audiences, probably sells more shirts or whatever. You can make a free market argument that those players are more valuable assets to that team than the women's players. Not to say that they're inferior, better, worse, have more right to play football or anything, but purely on a sort of capitalistic basis, those players bring in more money and therefore receive a larger portion of it in their wages. I don't know whether that seems right to me or whether that seems wrong to me. It's a complicated subject, but in the case of the national teams, I think it's much more straightforward, because they are employed by the same person, they are doing the same job. They should be paid the same.
And I also think they have an argument for ambassador. They have a bigger argument for ambassadorial qualities as representing your national team. If that's USA, whether that's England playing in the She Believes Cup, whether that's Japan, you are an ambassador for your country when you travel, when you play for them.
Definitely, and I think in women's football, the international game still sells the game as a whole. So you're an ambassador for the whole sport. And I've reported on England women at a tournament before, and they do so much media. They do so much of the PR and the selling of England, of the whole game. And the US women's team have been the kind of leaders in women's football for a long, long time, and are campaigned about this, I think, since 2016. And interestingly, Phil Neville, one of the first things he did when he took over England was he insisted on business class travel for the women's players, because even up to a year ago there was a slightly different treatment for the women than the men when they travelled. So there's little things that have to be picked away at. As Rory said, you can't really affect the club game at this stage because that's all market forces, but the international game can set an example on gender pay, and I'd be amazed if you know, in 4 or 5 years to come, we're not at a position where, at least in international football, all nations are paying men and women the same. That just seems so obvious case of right and wrong.
The other significance, I think, of what the US players have done is that if you look through a lot of the teams who will be in the World Cup this summer, some of the treatment that they receive is appalling from their federations. In Argentina, the facilities available to the women are pathetic. They aren't paid at all, I don't think. They often have to arrange their own travel. They are not treated like elite athletes. And I think hopefully part of the benefit of the US women's case is that it will kind of encourage a basic standard of respect to be afforded to the women's teams that isn't always... I think the FA probably do quite a good job compared to a lot of other federations around the world. But it's for those federations to see that these are equally kind of significant representative sides of their country, and to treat them with that respect that's really important.
It's also very important signalling to our daughters or to young women in general to say that actually if you treat people differently, then that affects self-esteem and how you view yourself in the world. And it's really important that I think the authorities, the clubs is a different debate and we can get on to that, but the authorities in football signal that to young women of the world that actually there is equality here, and clearly there isn't at the moment. FIFA, you'd have to say with FIFA and the FA, the direction of travel is correct. They are moving in that direction. FIFA have increased the World Cup shares, but at some point there's going to be a drive to have a central pot and distribute it equally between the men's and women's World Cup. And if any country was going to lead us, it had to be America, because actually the women's team have been a driver of the national team in America in a way that the men's team haven't really. Sort of, they had the very good World Cup. Was that 2 World Cups ago, wasn't it, where there was a bit of hysteria around the men's team, but the women's team have won it. They've got the superstars. Mia Hamm was, one of the first US superstars. They are the drivers of football in that country, and the fact that the global pots are different is not their fault. In their country, they're the ones who are driving the interest in the game.
Yeah, sure. OK, I'd like to talk a little bit about the performance of the England women's team in the She Believes Cup, because of course they were successful in that tournament. That's a pre-World Cup tune-up tournament. Of course, that tournament starts in France on June the 7th. John, how impressed are you by the work that the continuation, the work that Phil Neville has done so far with this group of players?
Oh, he's gone beyond, I think, even what he might have expected when he came in, and that driving up the standards that I talked about with things like travel, he's driven up the standards on the pitch and in terms of what those players think they should be able to achieve. So the difference between this year's She Believes Cup and last year's was immense. I mean, I watched a little bit of the US game, which they drew 2-2, but England were probably should have won that and believed they should have won that. And I think back to 2007, the Women's World Cup I reported on, when America were this, they were like Brazil. England just didn't feel they could ever get close to them. He's now going to the US and in their own backyard, going toe-to-toe with them, and winning a tournament like that, but then just talking about this being the springboard to then winning the World Cup. I mean, Mark Sampson did finish 3rd, so Phil Neville's got a difficult job to improve on that, but everything's been focused around winning, and there's nothing else will do, and I think that mental shift's as important as anything for that team.
How do we generate more interest? Is it all about visibility, Rory? Because I think it was over 20,000 people watching the games, the England-USA game, which I saw some of 2 great goals in there. But then if we go back to domestic football, the League Cup final a couple of weeks ago at Bramall Lane between Arsenal and Manchester City, I think the attendance was 2,400, 2,500. So what needs to happen for the women's game for there to be bigger attendances and more interest?
I think visibility is important. I think it's crucial that we give it as much of a platform as we can. Again, the media is judged by market forces to an extent as well, but we also, I think, have a responsibility to drive interest in subjects as well as to reflect interest in subjects, and that's really important, particularly with women's football, which has been basically suppressed for 70 years in this country. I think that success breeds interest without a shadow of a doubt. If you look at everything the England women's team have achieved in the last 5-6 years, really, since they started rising, becoming a force, that will have encouraged, I'm sure, countless girls to play football, and will have encouraged countless boys to play football as well, because it's all football. It doesn't really matter the gender of people playing it. I think that the Premier League having the big clubs on board is important, although it does make me slightly anxious that perhaps women's football is moving away from some of the teams that helped it survive in the dark years. I went to Doncaster a few weeks ago to report on the Bells, who, when I was growing up, were the women's team, and they've been basically left to rot because they don't have a strong affiliation with a men's club. They were overlooked, I think, in 2012 for promotion to the First Division in favour of Manchester City women, and then they missed out again last year because of Manchester United, among others, coming on board. And that's great to have those clubs on board, but it's a shame that the Bells and other teams like Lincoln have had to fall by the wayside. It will take time, and men's football is a juggernaut. It is a national obsession, but I think there's space for both, and there's, as long as we continue to give women's football visibility, and as long as the women keep on doing well, it will carve out an ever greater niche, I think. Yeah,
and they certainly did very well in the She Believes Cup. We need to talk a bit about men's football, because Gareth Southgate will name a squad this week for the game Czech Republic first, and then the away fixture in Montenegro. What do you expect? It's been a while since, of course, we saw an England squad. James Ward-Prowse, 6 in 8, I think it is for him. Another superb free kick for him yesterday. I guess we could look at Pickford's performance. Would he still be number 1 given yesterday's game at Newcastle and his form before that?
I think Ward-Prowse would be the one that they're looking at. Steve Holland was there yesterday, and you'd expect to see him in. Declan Rice, obviously, we're all expected to see in. I'm just interested in the fullbacks, because Trippier rested at the moment. Danny Rose, not a good game. They look really tired, those Tottenham fullbacks, for understandable reasons.
Who did he turn to?
Well, luckily, we've got, you know, luckily, because Chilwell, Alexander-Arnold,
Keep
you know,
going,
they've
going.
well, they've got Carl Walker, haven't they?
Aaron Wan-Bissaka.
That's the one.
We got there in the end. So, I mean, it's whether he leaves.
I don't know if you were tormenting me just then, or if you just didn't think that there was a...
I had a long list of fullbacks, and I was getting to him, but I was trying to go through them in hierarchical order.
But you didn't.
because he's the best, clearly. So does he give them a rest? It would feel like a demotion for them, but Spurs have got 3 weeks off, and Tripper and Rose look like they need that. That would be quite interesting scenario for me.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
I think Tom Heaton would be one to bring right back in. I think he's really unlucky not to go to the World Cup in the first place. And but it's interesting that Gareth's now at the stage of he might have to, you know, Trippier might have to be dropped, maybe Jordan Pickford should be dropped, and it's interesting he's now at the stage of having to make decisions about some of those World Cup stars, and in a way that'll test him because he's been really loyal to those players. But if he wants to keep people feeling he's rewarded merit, then he's got to make some tough calls on some of those guys.
Yeah. He's not making any bad calls so far, has he? Gareth Southgate. Okay, that England squad will be named this week up at St George's Park. OK, next up, we're going to talk, this one's baffling. Darren Moore, sacked by West Brom, 4th in the Championship. More on that next. Welcome back. As usual, Goals on Sunday follows us straight after the Sunday supplement this morning. Let's find out what Ben and Camry are up to. Ben?
Morning, Neil. Morning, everybody.
Morning, everybody.
Good to see you this morning. So we've got a busy show, haven't we, Kemi?
We have indeed. Loads and loads of talking points. Once again, Ben, I think it was a shutdown on referees knowing the laws of the game yesterday.
That's what we're questioning, of course. Offsides or not offsides, penalties or not penalties, red
sending
cards.
off, the whole lot.
Who'd be a referee, eh?
You wouldn't believe it in one day.
Charlie Daniels from Bournemouth is joining us. They got a great win yesterday on the road at Huddersfield after a while. I'm really looking forward to getting his thoughts on what's been a really big season for Bournemouth and for his career as well. So it should be a cracking show. Yeah,
certainly should be. That's Goals on Sunday. Follows us here on the Sunday supplement. Right, let's move into the Championship now. Let's find out where West Brom are. They are at the 4th. The 4th in the table. They sacked their manager last night, Darren Moore. Drew at home to Ipswich, who are at the foot of the table. And the club statement said that Darren took over at a very, very difficult time last season. Thanks very much for holding the fort for us, but we're actually now going to go and get a proper manager, basically, was pretty much the sentiment of that statement. Thoughts on Darren Moore and just how savage and brutal a decision this is?
It was savage, brutal and ridiculous. It's an eye-watering decision. I think, OK, you can make the case that automatic promotion's probably gone. I think Norwich, Leeds and Sheffield United seem to be the 3 that will take those 2 places, but he took a team that was a complete mess, kind of brought them back together, mounted a really good campaign. It's tailed off a little bit in the last few weeks, but then if he'd won yesterday, he'd still have a job. That is not the correct way to run a football club. That's easy. You don't run your team like that.
Once it gets the game at a time.
Yeah, if you're saying we'll sack the manager if you don't win, without taking into consideration everything else they've done, then I'm not in charge of a football team and probably I'm not qualified to run one, but that's the wrong way to do it. I'm fairly confident. Bouncing
back's just not easy, and it seems to me club executives in the Championship seem to think that, oh well, we were in the Premier League, so therefore we should be coming straight back. History shows that that's a really tough ask because the Championship is so competitive. So the idea that being 4th is somehow missing, below expectations. They've still got a chance to go up. Obviously, if Darren Moore had taken them through to Wembley and gone up in the playoffs, no one would have been complaining, and that's still a strong possibility. Would have been a strong possibility had he stayed. And of course, the fact that it's an eye-watering decision and it's really disappointing in many ways, but the fact that he's one of the few black managers obviously makes it even more disappointing. Yeah,
we'll get on to that subject in that very subject in a moment, because Twitter came alive last night, didn't it? When
Absolutely,
Darren Moore was sacked. Is there any justification if, and I don't know the terms that Darren Moore took the job, but is there any justification if West Brom said, look, if you're not in the top 2 by the time we sort of Easter's looming, if you're not in the top 2, we reserve the right, or we will make a change. Those are the rules. You have to be in the top 2.
Absolutely, there's a justification.
Some clubs would say that, wouldn't they? You have to
because what the League Managers Association always say is be clear about what your objectives are. So if he said take the jobs on these terms, these are the objectives. If you're not there, then and if that comes out, then that's fair enough. Although I would argue that's a silly objective to put on someone because it's such a competitive division.
This is football.
The club was in such a desperate state that it would have been ridiculous ridiculous to say you have to be in the top 2, but if they did it and he accepted it on those grounds, yes, of course. But I would have thought for most clubs, most executives, you have to be in the mix for promotion, which he is. That would be, for most people, a realistic expectation from where West Brom were.
If he's been sacked because he's not met expectations like that, then that is still the wrong way to run a club. Because those expectations, you can't guarantee that. You know, you can't legislate for the fact that, I mean, there's a decent chance that Norwich are the best coached team in the country. Norwich play some extraordinary stuff, and Leeds wouldn't be far behind them under Bielsa. So it's a really tough league. You look at what Stoke and Swansea are doing, who finished above West Brom in the Premier League. They are nowhere near, well, maybe not nowhere near, but they're unlikely to make the playoffs.
And if you look at another example, a more extreme example, Sunderland, they're in League One.
Yeah. So it's not the case that, as Rob said, it's not the case that if you drop down, you are automatically favourites to come back up.
Well, if being sacked in the top 4 is going to become a thing now, then where does that leave any manager? You know, what we're going to have in the future? Only one team can win the league, only 2 can go up, and as we've said, it's a really, really good league. I can't remember anyone being sacked in the top 4 before, and. You know, what are they going to achieve by doing that? Is this suddenly going to...
Didn't Karanka walk out at Middlesbrough briefly?
He walked out, yeah.
I think he had a huff for a game, wasn't it? I think.
He did walk,
and he was
back
under
in
pressure.
eventually,
He was under pressure.
I don't think Darren Moore
was fit when he was sacked, wasn't he?
He was, yeah.
Well, top was a trophy, I thought.
Even Wenger, who was the master of finishing 4th, waited till he was 6th before leaving.
You brought up the subject of race, Rob. Has that had any effect, in your view, on this decision?
I wouldn't have thought it had any effect. I think the issue is the opportunities you get. Now, on one hand, you can say West Brom gave him a platform, gave him an opportunity, and you know that's good because the problem for black managers is getting the platform. And to be honest, with the year he's had, he will get another job. And a lot of people have drawn parallels with Chris Hughton, who almost accidentally inherited the Newcastle job and then used that, even though he ended up getting sacked when they were in a pretty good position. He then has built a great career out of that. And I think the issue that for most people who monitor this is that you don't get the opportunities. And let's be clear, football, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, you know, shouldn't have got the Manchester United job. You get the job through connections, because of club background, and Darren Moore did it because of his, you know, because he was so loved at the club. So there's no equal recruitment process in football whereby we just look at the CVs and we pick the best one. It depends on your relationships with the people at the club and how it works. The point that's been made is that not enough black players are afforded the platform despite having some of those connections. And I think, on one hand, West Brom, well, they've given him the chance now to build a career as a first-team coach, which he probably wouldn't have had before that. But, you know, come on. I mean, let him finish the job, at least let him finish the season so we can judge him properly.
Yeah. Troy Townsend last night made the point rather forcefully on Twitter that you will never understand. You won't understand what it's like to be a black guy in football. Let's just say football community. We don't need to widen it out to the rest of society. Let's just focus on football. But if we can try to put ourselves in that position, and it is difficult, I understand that, and I accept Troy's point, would you trust football club boards to make the right decision in the appointment of their next manager?
I spoke to a black player the week before, who talked about this very issue and said that if you looked at someone like Sol Campbell, the fight that he's had, even with that CV, and Sol's an eccentric character, that's probably fair to say, but even with Sol Campbell's CV, he had a huge fight to get jobs, and he had to take Macclesfield, who were bottom of the Football League and are now 23rd, and that counts as success given where they were. He's done a really good job given how bad Macclesfield were. If someone like Sol Campbell finds it hard to get his foot in the door with his list of honours and his international career and his connections to... And Rob's perfectly right, a lot of football comes down to your network and your connections, and that's maybe not right, but it's how it works. I don't think if you were a black player hoping to go into coaching, you could have any faith at all in football clubs making a fair decision that you genuinely feel is made because you're not the right man for the job rather than because you're not the right colour for the job.
Roy, I accept your point. That's insane, because those players are worshipped. Whether that's I can go back to my history of watching football, but social integration, racial integration, you idolise those figures.
You do, absolutely.
Why would you idolise footballers for what they do on the field, and then it comes to a point when his manager says, "Oh no, okay, he's black."
But we're not talking about fans. Certainly not all fans, and fans operate differently to owners.
But people in the boardroom idolise the players. In the same
absolutely.
way, don't they?
But the proof of the pudding's in the eating, isn't it? That there are. I mean, I don't know what the kind of racial demographics of the Premier League are now, but I would imagine it's not far off 50-50, and yet Darren Moore's one of a handful of black managers. So it hasn't. I think it will get better, and I'm not saying that anyone in football is overtly racist, and I can't put myself in the position of a black player or a black coach. But from speaking to black players, there is that suspicion that they have to work harder for the opportunities. Not that the opportunities maybe don't materialise ever, but they have to work harder.
I think institutional racism is the hardest thing to talk about, and what you get is, I guess, I don't know what phrase exactly to use, but I guess the ruling white middle-class power bloc or whatever quite often doesn't want to hear about it because they say, oh, no, there's no problem here, we don't think we have a problem, so there is no problem. And I saw what Troy tweeted, and I saw the reaction to it, people shooting him down. I just think it's really important when, leading black figures have something to say about this, that they're actually given the courtesy of being listened to, rather than being shot down by, as I say, a ruling power bloc that says, no, we're going to tell you if there's a problem or not. You don't get to say what the problem is. If Troy Townsend, in his position, feels there's a problem, I think we have to take that on board rather than just knee-jerk and assume there's no problem at all. And as Rory said, self-evidently, there is a problem somewhere. So let's talk about it, let's hear about it, instead of denying it.
Well, was it the Abdoulaye Doucouré interview that in the Mirror yesterday where he talks about the language we use to talk about black players, which always focuses on physicality and never on intelligence?
Yes. You've got Gaetan Bong at Brighton, who's had 2 or 3 incidents, and I understand just feels it's been worth more trouble than it was having raised it, and doesn't want to talk about it anymore because it's affected, his sort of focus on the job. That's a terrible state to be in. People should be able to talk about it.
No, I agree. I'm glad we talked about it this morning, and I'm glad we talked about Darren Moore. I'm sure we'll hear from Darren and much more from him in the next few weeks once he comes to terms with that dismissal at West Bromwich Albion. OK, next up, we're going to talk about Liverpool playing Burnley this afternoon. More on that coming next. Welcome back. Excuse me. Daniel Taylor's column this morning. Provocative stuff. Jurgen Klopp, we must soothe the anxieties, not feed them, if he is to write the Reds' history. The basis of the piece is that he thinks that Liverpool create the illusion, John, that this means more to them than it does at any other football club, and this is based on history, tradition, stadium, folklore, the players. He says perhaps it is inevitable, given the backdrop, that many think that the biggest problem for Liverpool might just be themselves. Is he right?
Well, I mean, he's talking about the marketing, some of it about Anfield.
This is the drive up to Anfield, isn't it? Yeah.
Where legends are made, and they've got some very sort of corny slogans. And I think when you see people trying to take fans' passion and turn it into slogans, it always jars. But it's actually been part of the whole passion, emotion thing's been part of Liverpool's history since Shankly. Really, he tried to rally that. He tried to create a feeling that helped power Liverpool about being something unique and having a unique community to represent. And there's no harm in that. That's part of many clubs' DNA. Borussia Dortmund see themselves as a German version. I think fans of other clubs get irritated because every club, every set of fans thinks that their club means just a little bit more than any other club. Klopp himself has tried to tread that line between rallying it but keeping a lid on it, and it's noticeable this year he's actually dialed down the emotional rhetoric. So he clearly feels that there's a potential barrier, as Daniel says, to success with getting too emotionally overwrought. And in the last couple of weeks, we've had lots of Liverpool players from 2013-14 saying, "Oh no, the fans' pressure didn't get to us," and blah blah blah. I mean, I feel, having reported on a couple of failed title charges, that it always has been an issue. I think it has been a problem that has to be confronted. But I think if Liverpool fail this time, I don't think that'll be the reason, because I haven't seen any signs of this team getting over-emotional or getting over-nervous. In some ways, you could say they're maybe not playing with quite enough passion, that Klopp's dialed it down too much, because there's been in the derby last week, Liverpool seemed to become quite a methodical team. Maybe they need a little bit more of that in the right measure, I'd say.
Rory?
It's funny that you don't get any other team calling their stadium the Theatre of Dreams, or their academy the Stroll of Science, or what's West Ham's called? What are West Ham?
Yeah.
Or, you know, the beautiful game. I mean, it is literally just Liverpool who use overt rhetoric to sell their football club, isn't it? It just doesn't happen anywhere else. I think the problem that Klopp's got, to me, is that he relied so much in those first 3 years or 2 years on that sort of larger-than-life character, on that feeling that he engendered, on the big smile and the chest thump and all that. It's slightly insincere when you hear him say, look, everybody needs to calm down. You think, well, hang on, you've brought everybody up to this pitch of excitement. But the thing with Liverpool is it probably does mean there is probably more tension in the area in Liverpool than anywhere else, because they're desperate for the title. That's fair enough. That's a statement of fact. It's 29 years. They want the title. It will not mean more, but it probably matters more to them than it does to other clubs. Not that it doesn't matter to other clubs, just that they are really desperate for the title.
But there's nothing wrong with saying that, is there?
No.
I wouldn't take issue with someone saying, well, we want to win the league title. So, well, yeah,
no, not at all. And I don't think there's anything wrong. It's a little, as Johnny says, it's a little bit corny and cheesy, the slogans that you see on the drive up to Anfield. But it's a marketing campaign. Every club does this. It's a business. The problem they've got is that, as Johnny identifies, that they have been a lot more kind of contained this year, Liverpool. And it looked for a long time like that maybe was a strategy, and then in the last sort of 2-3 months of the season, Klopp would kind of take the handbrake off and unleash them. There haven't really been signs that he's been able to do that. Against United and Everton away, you have to give them a pass. I think those are difficult games. The test now is they probably have to win every game to win the league. The City will not drop very many points. So they might drop points. Guardiola said that yesterday. They won't drop many points. If Liverpool have to show real consistency and probably score quite a lot of goals to win the league. And it's whether they can cope with the pressure. And there will be pressure because it's an intensely pressurised situation.
Does it matter? There's the caption here, which I noticed last week. Klopp took out his frustrations at Everton last Sunday on reporters after the game, and he said, well, you might not believe, along the lines of, well, you might not believe anymore, but I do. I'm still here. I still believe we can go on to win the title. Is that kind of friction? Will that destabilise them in the run-in?
Well, I think the problem with Jurgen Klopp is the reason why he's perfect for Liverpool and Liverpool Football Club is because he is emotional, and that's why he's part of the reason why he's a great manager. Again, there's other reasons. He is very good tactically, and he brings innovations to football. But the charisma and the emotion is part of it. That's why Roy Hodgson didn't work at Liverpool. Jurgen Klopp does. So obviously, then the trouble with having a manager who's very emotional is, as Rory said, there's a danger of raising everybody so much that it becomes a barrier or difficulty. I don't actually think it's the problem. I mean, of course he believes. I think they're in a. At the start of the season, if you'd said they're in this place, I think they're in a really good place. I don't think they'll do it, because Manchester City have a stronger squad and they can reach for players like Riyad Mahrez when players are injured or they want to rotate, which probably makes a difference. But the fact that they're in there competing with what we all acknowledge is probably one of the best sides in Europe, one of the best Premier League sides we saw, and they're going toe-to-toe. A side that absolutely ran away with it last year is a really good achievement. Yeah, it certainly is. We'll find out if they can handle the title pressure, because, of course, they play this afternoon against Burnley up at Anfield. Lots of football on the way, but we've run out of time this morning. Thanks very much for your company this morning, Rob, Rory and to John. OK, lots of football coming your way. It's all on Sky. Birmingham against Aston Villa. It's first up. Chelsea are in action this afternoon at Stamford Bridge. And Arsenal, of course, the big game against Manchester United at 4:15. OK, download the Sky Sports app. You can watch the in-game goals and the highlights on your mobile phone. Ben and Cammy, they follow us. Oh, look at the millennials. Get off your phones, talk to each other. Come on, communicate. They will communicate with Charlie Daniels in a few moments' time. That's Goals on Sunday. Follows us here on the Sunday Supplement. OK, don't forget you can download the podcast from all the usual places. You can catch up with the show on demand. Don't forget to watch the football a little bit later. I'll be there. It's Arsenal against Manchester United from 4:15. We're back next weekend, next Sunday, our usual time, our favourite time, 9:30. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Sky Sports. Feel it all.